It was 2:30 a.m. when I crept through Jessica's backyard in Phoenix, my phone recording everything through her kitchen window.
My grandson, Tyler, who should have been safely asleep, was sitting alone at the table eating cereal while his mother and her boyfriend snorted lines of drugs off the counter 3 feet away. This was the loving home environment Child Protective Services had chosen over mine. Tyler had been with her for 2 weeks, and I already had enough evidence to destroy her in court. But first, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of mother the system thought was better than a grandmother. The Arizona desert heat was still radiating from the concrete even at this late hour, but my blood ran cold watching my 5-year-old grandson navigate around drug paraphernalia to get to the refrigerator. Tyler was wearing the same Spider-Man pajamas I'd bought him, but they were dirty now, and he looked thinner than when he'd left my apartment 14 days ago. I'd been fighting this battle for 6 months. Ever since Jessica had gotten out of her 3rd stint in rehab and decided she wanted to play mother again. For 3 years, Tyler had lived with me while his father Carlos served his sentence for armed robbery. For 3 years, I'd been his stability, his routine, his safety net. I'd taught him to tie his shoes, helped him learn his letters, held him when nightmares about his daddy being gone made him cry. But according to the family court system, none of that mattered as much as biology. "Mrs. Martinez," the social worker had said during our last meeting, her voice dripping with condescension, "while we appreciate everything you've done for Tyler, children belong with their parents whenever possible. Jessica has completed her treatment program and is ready to rebuild her relationship with her son." I'd wanted to scream that Jessica had completed treatment programs twice before, only to relapse within weeks each time. I'd wanted to tell them about the midnight phone calls from Carlos begging me to keep Tyler safe from his mother's chaos. I'd wanted to show them the drawings Tyler had made of our quiet life together, pictures of us reading books, cooking dinner, going to the park, simple, peaceful moments that spoke of healing and love. Instead, I'd sat quietly in that sterile government office, a 72-year-old Hispanic grandmother being lectured about what was best for my grandson by people who'd never spent a sleepless night walking the floors with a traumatized child. The worst part was Tyler's confusion. He'd lived with me since he was 2 years old. I was the one who'd potty trained him, who knew he was afraid of the dark, who understood that he needed his stuffed elephant to fall asleep. To him, I wasn't just abuela, I was home. "Why do I have to go live with her?" he'd ask me the night before the custody transfer, his 5-year-old logic struggling to understand why he was being separated from the only stability he'd ever known. "Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense to little boys," I'd told him, holding back my own tears. "But you remember what abuela taught you, okay? You're brave, you're smart, and no matter what happens, I love you." I'd packed his favorite books, his stuffed animals, the little wooden train set we'd built together. Jessica had arrived with her new boyfriend, a man whose neck tattoos and shifty eyes immediately put me on alert and barely acknowledged Tyler's tears as they loaded him into their car. "Don't worry, kid," the boyfriend had said, his voice rough from years of smoking. "We're going to have fun." That had been 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks of supervised phone calls where Tyler sounded increasingly distant and tired. 2 weeks of Jessica posting photos on social media showing herself as the reformed, loving mother. Carefully cropped images that didn't show the reality of what was happening off camera. But I hadn't been sitting idle.
50 years of working as a court translator in the Phoenix family court system had taught me a few things about gathering evidence and building cases. I'd also learned that sometimes the system fails, and when it does, grandmothers have to take matters into their own hands. I'd started with simple surveillance. Jessica's apartment complex was in a rough part of town, the kind of place where a 72-year-old woman with silver hair and a rosary around her neck could blend into the background. I'd sit in my old Honda Civic, watching the comings and goings, noting the steady stream of visitors who never stayed long, the telltale pattern of drug dealing. I documented the men who came and went at all hours, the shouting matches that echoed across the courtyard, the nights when Jessica would leave Tyler alone while she disappeared for hours. I'd photographed the drug paraphernalia I could see through the windows, The empty beer bottles that accumulated on the balcony, the general neglect that surrounded my grandson's new, loving home. But tonight was different. Tonight, I'd seen Jessica's boyfriend arrive with a small plastic bag, and I'd watched them divide its contents on the kitchen counter while Tyler sat just feet away, forgotten and exposed to their illegal activities. I crept closer to the window, my phone recording everything. The audio was muffled through the glass, but the visual evidence was damning. Jessica, the woman Child Protective Services had deemed ready to be a mother, was actively using illegal drugs in the presence of her 5-year-old son.
Tyler looked so small sitting at that table, mechanically eating cereal at nearly 3 a.m. because no one had bothered to feed him dinner or put him to bed at a reasonable hour. His little legs swung from the chair, not quite reaching the floor, and I could see the exhaustion in his posture, even from outside. I wanted to burst through that door, scoop him up, and take him home where he belonged. But I knew that would only make things worse, legally. Instead, I continued recording, building the case that would hopefully bring him back to safety. The boyfriend noticed me first. "Yo, Jess," he said, pointing toward the window. "Someone's outside." Jessica looked up from the drug-covered counter, her eyes wild and unfocused. When she saw me, her face contorted with rage. "You crazy old bitch!" she screamed, stumbling toward the window. "What are you doing here? I'm calling the cops." I didn't run. I'd gotten what I needed, and running would only make me look guilty. Instead, I calmly walked to the front of the building and waited.
Tyler appeared at the window, pressing his small hands against the glass. Even through the barrier, I could see the confusion and fear in his eyes. This wasn't the stable, loving environment the court had envisioned when they'd awarded custody to his mother. Jessica burst out of the front door, her boyfriend trailing behind her. She was clearly under the influence, her movements erratic and her speech slurred. "You have no right to be here," she screamed. "I have custody. Tyler is my son." "Yes," I said calmly, still recording with my phone. "He is your son, and look how you're taking care of him." The boyfriend stepped forward aggressively. "Lady, you need to leave now." I stood my ground. At 72, I'd survived poverty, discrimination, an abusive first marriage, and the heartbreak of watching my son struggle with addiction and crime. I wasn't about to be intimidated by a drug dealer with neck tattoos. "I'm standing on a public sidewalk," I said evenly. "I have every right to be here, but you two have no right to expose a child to illegal drug use." Jessica's face was a mask of guilt and fury. She knew she'd been caught, and she knew I had evidence. "Nobody's going to believe some crazy old woman," she spat. "We'll see," I replied.
The next morning, I was at my lawyer's office before they opened. Maria Santos had been fighting family court cases for 20 years, and she'd helped me navigate the system when Carlos was first incarcerated and I'd sought temporary custody of Tyler. "Rosa," she said, reviewing the video footage I'd captured, "this is exactly what we needed. But are you prepared for what comes next? Jessica's going to fight dirty. She's going to claim you're stalking her, that you're an unfit guardian because of your age, that you're trying to steal her child." "Let her try," I said. "I have 3 years of stability to show for my guardianship. What does she have? 2 weeks of drug use and neglect?" Maria nodded grimly. "I'll file an emergency motion for custody modification first thing this morning. We'll request an immediate welfare check and present this evidence to Judge Morrison." Judge Morrison was someone I knew well from my years as a court translator. He was fair but tough, and he'd seen enough custody cases to recognize genuine concern versus vindictive manipulation. The emergency hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. Jessica arrived with a public defender, clearly unprepared for the legal battle that was about to unfold. She looked rough, the kind of rough that comes from a night of drug use followed by a morning of panic. "Your Honor," Maria began, "we're here because a child's safety is in immediate jeopardy. Mrs. Martinez has evidence that Tyler is being exposed to illegal drug use in his mother's home. We presented the video footage on a large screen in the courtroom. The images spoke for themselves. Jessica and her boyfriend using drugs while Tyler sat nearby. The child's obvious neglect. The dangerous environment he was being forced to live in. Jessica's public defender tried to claim the evidence was obtained illegally, but Maria quickly countered that I'd been standing on a public sidewalk and had recorded activities visible through an uncovered window. Furthermore, Your Honor, Maria continued, Mrs. Martinez was acting out of legitimate concern for her grandson's welfare. The video shows clear evidence of child endangerment. Judge Morrison watched the footage with the grim expression of someone who'd seen enough custody cases like this. When it finished, he turned to Jessica. Miss Walsh, do you have an explanation for what we've just seen? Jessica's public defender whispered frantically in her ear before she stood. Your Honor, that wasn't what it looked like. We were just, I wasn't using anything harmful, and Tyler was fine. He was eating. The judge's expression didn't change. Ms. Walsh, are you claiming that the white powder visible in this video was not an illegal substance? Jessica's silence was answer enough. Your Honor, her public defender tried, my client has completed a treatment program and is working hard to rebuild her relationship with her son. One mistake shouldn't. One mistake, Judge Morrison interrupted. Ms. Walsh has 2 prior drug-related arrests and has been through treatment 3 times. This isn't one mistake. This is a pattern of behavior that puts a child at risk. He turned to me. Mrs. Martinez, you've been Tyler's primary caregiver for 3 years? Yes, Your Honor, since he was 2 years old when his father was incarcerated. And during that time, have there been any reports of neglect or endangerment? No, Your Honor. Tyler has been healthy, happy, and well cared for. He's thriving in school, has regular medical checkups, and lives in a stable, drug-free environment. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. I'm going to order an immediate return of custody to Mrs. Martinez, pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services. Miss Walsh, you'll be subject to random drug testing, and any contact with Tyler will be supervised until you can demonstrate sustained sobriety. Jessica exploded. This is bullshit. He's my son. You can't just give him to some old woman. Miss Walsh, the judge said sternly, that old woman has provided your son with 3 years of stability and safety. You've provided him with 2 weeks of exposure to illegal drugs. The choice about who's better qualified to care for Tyler seems clear to me. The bailiff was already moving toward Jessica as she continued screaming about her rights and how unfair the system was. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was complaining about unfairness while I'd just spent 6 months fighting a system that had initially chosen her drug-addled chaos over my stable love. Tyler was returned to me that evening. When the social worker brought him to my apartment, he ran into my arms like he'd been holding his breath for 2 weeks and could finally exhale. Abuela, he whispered against my neck, I want to stay with you forever. Forever is a long time, mijo, I said, holding him tight. But for now, you're home. That night, as I tucked Tyler into his own bed, the bed with the dinosaur sheets he'd picked out, in the room where his books and toys waited exactly where he'd left them, he looked up at me with his father's dark eyes. Abuela, why did Mommy have that white powder stuff? The question I'd been dreading. How do you explain addiction to a 5-year-old? How do you tell a child that his mother loves drugs more than she loves him? Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, I said carefully. Your mommy is sick and she needs help to get better. Will she get better? I don't know, mijo. I hope so. But until she does, you're going to stay here with me where you're safe. Tyler nodded solemnly, processing information no child should have to understand. Abuela, yes? I'm glad you came to get me. I kissed his forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, feeling the solid weight of his small body in my arms. I will always come for you, Tyler. Always. The legal battle wasn't over. Jessica would have opportunities to regain custody if she could prove sustained sobriety and stability. Carlos would be released from prison in 2 years and would want to rebuild his relationship with his son. There would be more court dates, more evaluations, more bureaucrats questioning whether a 72-year-old grandmother was the best option for raising a young child. But for tonight, Tyler was safe. He was fed, clean, loved, and protected. He was in a home where drug wasn't used as a late-night activity while children ate cereal at the kitchen table. He was with someone who put his needs first, who understood that love meant sacrifice and stability, not just biology and legal rights.
3 weeks later, Jessica was arrested on drug possession charges when police raided her apartment. The boyfriend was charged with dealing. The loving home environment that Child Protective Services had chosen over mine was revealed to be exactly what I'd known it was all along: a dangerous place where children were accessories to adult dysfunction. The social worker who'd originally recommended Tyler's return to Jessica came to see me, her demeanor significantly different from our previous interactions. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, sitting in my living room while Tyler played with his trains on the floor, "I owe you an apology. We made a mistake, and Tyler could have been seriously hurt because of our poor judgment." "The system isn't perfect," I replied diplomatically, "but it worked in the end." "How did you know?" she asked. "How were you so certain that Jessica wasn't ready to be a mother?" I watched Tyler carefully arranging his toy trains, his little tongue poking out in concentration as he worked. This was what childhood should look like: safe, innocent, focused on play instead of survival. "Because I know the difference between loving someone and loving the idea of someone," I said. "Jessica loves the idea of being Tyler's mother. She loves the sympathy she gets for being a struggling single mom, the benefits she receives for having a dependent child, the way people praise her for getting her life together. But she doesn't love Tyler enough to put his needs before her wants. Real love requires sacrifice, consistency, and putting the child first. Addiction makes that impossible." The social worker nodded slowly. "Will you continue to seek permanent custody?" "If that's what's best for Tyler, yes. But I'm not trying to steal him from his parents. I'm trying to protect him until they can be the parents he deserves." 6 months later, Carlos was granted early release for good behavior. His first stop was my apartment, where he spent an hour holding Tyler and crying. Tears of joy at seeing his son healthy and happy. Tears of guilt for the choices that had led to their separation. "Mom," he said to me that evening after Tyler had gone to bed, "I can never repay you for what you've done. You can repay me by staying clean and being the father Tyler needs. That's all I want." Carlos nodded, his eyes clear and determined in a way I hadn't seen since he was Tyler's age. "I'm going to do it right this time. I'm going to be the man you raised me to be." "I know you will, mijo. But until you're ready to take full responsibility, Tyler stays with me. His stability comes first. I understand. Thank you for fighting for him when I couldn't." A year later, Tyler started first grade. I walked him to school every morning, and we'd talk about his day over dinner every evening. He was thriving, reading above grade level, making friends, participating in soccer and art classes. The trauma of his early years was healing, replaced by the security of knowing he was wanted, protected, and loved. Jessica completed another treatment program and was granted supervised visitation once a month. Sometimes she showed up clean and sober, bringing Tyler small gifts and asking about his school. Other times she missed appointments or arrived clearly under the influence, her visits canceled by the supervising social worker. Tyler had learned not to get his hopes up about her promises. At 6 years old, he was already wiser about addiction than most adults, understanding that his mother's love for drugs was stronger than her love for him. "Abuela," he said one day after a particularly disappointing canceled visit, "is it okay that I don't miss Mommy very much?" "It's okay to feel however you feel, mijo. Your feelings are always okay. I feel sad for her, but I don't want to live with her again. Is that bad?" Tyler nodded, satisfied with this explanation. At 6, he already understood that love and safety weren't always the same thing, and that choosing safety didn't make him a bad person. The custody battle had taught all of us valuable lessons. Tyler learned that he was worth fighting for, that someone would always protect him, and that stability mattered more than biology. Carlos learned that being a father meant more than just DNA, and that earning his son's trust would require sustained effort and proof of change. I learned that 72 wasn't too old to fight for what mattered, that grandmother's intuition was usually right, and that sometimes the system needed a push to do the right thing. Most importantly, I learned that families aren't just about who gave birth to whom. They're about who shows up, who sacrifices, who puts the child's needs first, and who provides the love and stability that allows a young person to grow into their best self. Tyler was 8 when he asked me why I'd fought so hard to keep him. Because, I told him, you deserved someone who would fight for you. Every child deserves that. Will you keep fighting for me? Always, mijo, until you're old enough to fight for yourself, and even then, I'll be right beside you. That promise, to always fight for the ones we love, to never give up when their safety and well-being are at stake, became our family motto. It was written in every decision I made, every court hearing I attended, every night I stayed awake worrying about his future. And years later, when Tyler graduated high school as valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to college, when he gave a speech about the grandmother who saved his life by refusing to let the system fail him, I knew that every sleepless night, every legal battle, every moment of standing up to people who underestimated an elderly Hispanic grandmother had been worth it. Sometimes the system works, sometimes it doesn't. But sometimes, when you love someone enough, you become the system that protects them. And that's exactly what I did.